Tomasz, what is your take on a country the size of Taiwan having 3 full-service carriers?
I think Starlux come with a very interesting business model. They just wanted to be the Emirates of Asia. Also, they said they are trying to develop a model of a boutique airline. And while before a pandemic, it could be a little bit optimistic, the pandemic changed a lot.
What do you make of this relative lack of homegrown LCCs here in Taiwan?
In the end of the day, Taiwan has a very low market share from low-cost carriers, and that is bad news for consumers because low-cost carriers, as we all know, brings down fares and stimulates demand.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Tomasz Koper, sitting in for Divya Gopalan. Unless you live in the United States or China, your country likely only has 1, maybe 2 full-service airlines. So how come Taiwan, a nation of 23.5 million people, recently welcomed its 3rd such airline? And how many aircraft and connections does the post-pandemic world need? Well, fasten your seatbelts, stow away your tray tables, and bring your seats to an upright position because we're about to take off into a discussion on the aviation industry in the region. And joining us on the flight deck, we welcome Brendan Sobie, who is an aviation analyst and consultant based in Singapore, and Tomasz Śniedziewski, an aviation journalist speaking to us from Kaohsiung in Taiwan. Brendan, I want to start with you and with an overview of the airline industry in the region. Specifically, tell me, how is it recovering from the COVID pandemic?
Yes, so I mean, from a traffic perspective, we're almost fully recovered and back to pre-COVID or 2019 levels. We're not quite there yet, but we should be there by the end of this year and for an annual basis, maybe next year. So traffic came back pretty quickly once borders reopened in all the markets in Asia Pacific. Obviously, Asia reopened later than other regions, and some countries like China reopened very late. But once the reopening occurred, there was in most markets there was quite a rapid recovery, a lot of pent-up demand, a lot of revenge travel. And we had a situation where we had more demand than supply for the first year or 2 years after the reopening in most markets, just because it took a while for airlines to catch up to that demand and put in enough capacity. Nowadays, we're getting closer to a situation where we have that capacity is coming closer to demand, although in some markets we still have this gap between capacity and demand, partly because of aircraft delivery delays and supply chain constraints. And when you have that gap, by the way, that's what creates the high airfare environment that we've seen the last year or two, where fares are significantly higher than pre-COVID. The high fares, of course, is good news for airlines in that a lot of them have done fairly well financially and been profitable in this period, although it does vary depending on the airline and the market.
But Tomasz, what kind of impact have we seen in Taiwan, and has the COVID pandemic caused any long-lasting changes in the airline industry here?
Right. So far, we're still recovering in a way that, in terms of connectivity, meaning the number of destinations we can fly from Taiwan, we still haven't seen some of the destination come back. On the other hand, there are very positive changes for airlines in Taiwan, namely the situation between China and the United States. Currently, there are political limits of the number of flights that can be operated weekly between those two countries, and many carriers from Taiwan are benefiting of transferring passengers traveling between the United States and China, as well as carriers from Korea or Japan are in the same position. What we should be looking right now is in the whole region, in the first to recover are the main hubs. Singapore Airport is a very good example of this, but not so yet in terms of the smaller regional airports. In Taiwan, it can be, for example, Kaohsiung. So we will see then how connectivity goes, a number of destinations from the country.
Well, Starlux joined the ranks of China Airlines and EVA Air, making some ask, is the Taiwanese aviation market big enough to hold 3 full-service carriers? For a comment, we reached out to Professor Alex Liu, the chairman of the Department of Aviation Technology at Taoyang University of Technology in Taiwan.
目前来看， 会不会太多呢？可能我们不仅要考虑加速这个问题，也要进一步来思考的就是航空公司的格局大小。那所谓格局大小，就是说它的机队数量，还有它的机队的配置，这些种种的因素。那以近期加入市场的星宇航空来讲，可以看得到的，目前星宇航空也开始大量的在北美洲要开拓它的市场。那这个近期就我的理解，在7月14号的时候，华航也会开西雅图的航线，那星宇也会跟进。所以也就是说，其实如果说我们单纯看这个加速，可能不是那么的精准，因为我们没有去考虑到的是说，它整个航网的结构、航网的布局上面，它想要开拓的这个格局，可能不是针对旅客的出国回国的这个需求，而是外国旅客透过台湾来变成一个中转衔接的这样子的一个市场。那当然，邻近的仁川机场，或者是香港的赤道角机场，或者是东南亚的新加坡樟宜机场，我想大家都是在这个枢纽结构上面去做努力，那打造的都是外国旅客转机的这个比例，那这个是另外一个可以去来探讨的。所以以目前来讲的话，华航、长荣各据一方，那星宇也积极的在成长，所以这个结构大概目前来讲，国内应该还不至于有所谓的，就是说市场饱和，那主要是市场还可以再去开拓。
So, Tomasz, what is your take on a country the size of Taiwan having 3 full-service carriers?
Well, I would say let the market decide. I think Starlux come with a very interesting business model. They just wanted to be the Emirates of Asia. Also, they said they are trying to develop a model of a boutique airline. And while before a pandemic, it could be a little bit sound a little bit optimistic, the pandemic changed a lot. After pandemic, the segment of travel which didn't grow yet is a business travel, and at the same time, more leisure travelers are traveling, and they are willing to spend more money on luxury experience. And somehow this taps very well into the business model of Starlux, saying that it is a new airline, so it's still limited by some constraint. First of all, is slot allocation at Tallinn Airport, which is currently a little bit crowded airport, and also I understand Starlux would love to have faster deliveries of aircraft to be able to build the network in a higher pace.
Well, Brendan, Professor Liu also mentioned turning Taoyuan, which is Taiwan's biggest airport, into a hub, or just turning Taiwan into a transit hub. But if you compare Taiwan's biggest airport, which is Taoyuan, to other hubs in the region like Changi in Singapore or Incheon in South Korea, the former looks a bit pale. Is it even possible for Taiwan to become a transit hub that could service 3 airlines and an increased number of transit passengers?
Well, it is already a major transit hub. It has been for some time. It is a top 10 international airport in Asia Pacific. It's not quite as large as Incheon, Hong Kong, or Singapore, but it is fairly close. And the recovery rate, what we see in terms of traffic today compared to pre-COVID is also in line with the other airports, higher than Hong Kong actually, because Hong Kong's been a bit slower. But in line generally with the overall market, which is about 90% recovered. The question really becomes, Taiwan has this transit position already, is quite successful at carrying transit passengers, particularly from North America into other parts of Asia, traditionally more Southeast Asia, but because of the China-US crisis, also into China, as Tomasz mentioned earlier. But the question really becomes is how is this most effectively served? Because if you look at the other hub airports, you don't have 3 full-service airlines for what is actually a slightly larger pie. Even if Taiwan, say, becomes as large as Incheon or Changi and Hong Kong, the three slightly larger ones, which is possible over time, you don't need three airlines. What's happening in Korea is you have a merger between Korean Air and Asiana. So the two major network airlines, there are some smaller players there as well, the two major network full-service airlines are merging together. In Singapore, you have one. In Hong Kong, you also have one major one. So why in Taiwan do you have three? It is subscale. And of course, time will tell, whether they're successful or not, and the market will decide. But just generally speaking, if you look at, how the world generally operates with hub airports and how airlines work in terms of scale and being financially viable with this kind of model, it is certainly a challenging position to maintain three airlines over the long term, all with this hub and spoke network model.
Well, Tomasz, is the entry of Starlux into the market having an effect on the two other major airlines here, so EVA Air and China Airlines? Even just on a service level, really, we see that China Airlines have partnered with like 3-star restaurants or 1-star Michelin star restaurants to offer in-flight meals. Does it mean that Starlux is sort of like pushing up the other two airlines into a more luxury segment of the market?
I think we can say so, but also the market change itself. We have more less business travelers and more leisure travelers nowadays. And while business travelers, while traveling, are concentrate mostly of having a rest or having the work done, perhaps leisure travelers are focused more on experience, especially in the premium classes. So, definitely arrival of Starlux Airlines added to this mix. But I think it would be unfair to say that the other airlines didn't do well in this field before. EVA is a 5-star airline, has been 5-star airline even before Starlux arrival, and China Airlines is very respected carrier too.
Having 3 full-service airlines is not the only quirk of the Taiwanese aviation industry. Another is the fact that the country has very little of its own capacity on the other side of the airline spectrum, the low-cost carriers. Many budget connections are operated by foreign airlines like Scoot or Vietjet. For a comment on that situation, we reached out to Xin In-Li, an economics affairs journalist with Taiwan's Central News Agency. Take a listen.
There is no budget terminal that we have. So right now the airport we are building a third terminal. And the government is thinking about relocating all the budget airlines to the first terminal in the future, and to make it exclusively for them. It may work. I don't know if it will work, but there are discussions that we need to have this a dedicated terminal for them. Tiger Air has 90% load factor, but still many other major like Scoot and some other major LCCs, they all have more than higher than 90%. So I think that the market potential is here. What's worth mentioning is those Scoot is from Singapore Airlines, stemming from those bigger airlines. So Tiger Air first, it's joint venture between Singapore and Tiger Air and Taiwanese China Airlines. So at first, I think when they were struggling with those financial challenges, I think it's important that they have some backup. If there are any other smaller companies want to enter in these markets, it's not easy for them.
So, Brendan, we've heard that market potential is there, and we also know that carriers like AirAsia are adding new connections from Taipei and from Kaohsiung, mainly to Japan this time around at least. So what do you make of this relative lack of homegrown LCCs here in Taiwan?
Yeah, so this has been an issue for Taiwan for at least a decade. Taiwan was very slow in establishing local low-cost carriers, while most the region, almost every other country in Asia kind of raced forward with LCCs in the kind of 10 to 20 year ago time frame. Taiwan had a little bit, with Tiger Air Taiwan, which is now 100% owned by China Airlines, but it's very small. It had one failure with V Air, which was under TransAsia. Why it failed and why Tiger Air Taiwan hasn't really become very big, it could be another conversation altogether. But in the end of the day, Taiwan has a very low market share from low-cost carriers, and that is bad news for consumers because low-cost carriers, as we all know, brings down fares and stimulates demand. And I don't think it's an issue of having a budget terminal. Most or virtually all airports in Asia don't have a budget terminal. It's about just airline strategy and having somebody enter the market from a local perspective instead of more additional full-service airlines. So it's very unusual to have 3 major full-service airlines and 1 low-cost carrier. If you look at any other market, the ratio is very much different. So the market is mainly served by foreign airlines. That is the low-cost market, and you have a very unusual amount of what we call 6 freedom routes by budget carriers, by low-cost carriers in Taiwan. Fifth freedom routes. Fifth freedom routes are routes that connect Taiwan with other countries that are not from the base of the airline. So, for example, AirAsia is based in Southeast Asia. Scoot is based in Southeast Asia. Jetstar Asia is based in Southeast Asia, but they all operate from Taiwan into markets in North Asia, primarily Japan. And this has been happening for some time. And the reason for this is there's just massive opportunity that the carriers here in Taiwan are not tapping into. So they're just leaving it for the foreign airlines. And we're going to see more of this. AirAsia particularly very keen on expanding its Taipei virtual base with more Fifth Freedom routes because they see a high demand and limited competition. And really, it's just about eating what should be the lunch of the Taiwanese carriers, but they have failed to establish themselves in the budget end of the market. Ultimately, maybe this will be corrected, but in the near future, in the medium term, I don't see it corrected. And ultimately, we're going to be relying on foreign airlines and an unusually low, what we call LCC penetration rate in Taiwan, which is to the detriment of the consumer.
And Tomasz, Ms. Lee also mentioned the fact that successful LCCs in the region seem to be offshoots or subsidiaries of bigger and more established airlines. Is that becoming a trend? Does that mean that we won't see, new independent low-cost carriers like, Ireland's Ryanair?
Well, there are this kind of discussion in the industry if it's really good to have this full-service parent, or is it actually not good? Some analysts say that probably having a full-service parent can affect the thinking about the operation and aggressiveness of a low-cost branch. But indeed, in Asia region, a lot of low-cost carriers are the capital airlines for big airline holdings. The good example of this is Scoot, but also Japan, like All Nippon Airlines Group or Japan Airlines. I think one potential benefit of this is also not only about funding, but also about availability of aircraft. We see it especially in Japan, like ANA is passing the older aircraft to the low-cost branch. Otherwise, it will be in this current situation in the market when orders are filled up in a major producer up to end of the decade. For a new entrant into the market, it will be difficult to secure the capacity.
Brendan, staying with the international perspective here, Taiwanese airlines, the 3 full-service carriers, are targeting markets like Japan, China, North America with their connections, but they seem to be neglecting some important regional destinations. For example, there's no direct flight from Taiwan to India, which is quickly becoming one of the world's largest markets, and it is the world's most populous country. So why is that? Why is this preference for North America?
Yeah, well, first of all, for India, it is a massive market and it's growing, but you need to have the demand for travel between Taiwan and India to justify direct flights. It's the same thing with China to India. Mainland China and India are not very well connected either. There's very limited flights, even though they're 2 massive markets in terms of the individual markets. You have to have demand between the two. And of course, if you don't have that much demand, what happens is it's a lot easier being served by other hubs using the Sixth Freedom rights. So because you look at Singapore, for example, they have many connections into India, so they can you can connect via Singapore or Kuala Lumpur and Bangkok very easily into India from Taiwan, and more effectively serving that market. And this is again goes back to the point that we have these three network full service carriers, despite a medium-sized market, and despite an airport that is a hub airport, but it's not really big enough for necessarily three hub carriers. The issue is there's just too much overlap. Seattle's the best example of this. With we were mentioning before, China Airlines and Starlux entering Seattle in the coming months. This has been an EVA market for some time. And just to add insult to injury, Delta Airlines has decided this year to launch this route as well. So you have 4 airlines on this route. I mean, and 0 flights to India, or you can pick a lot of other destinations. This is they seem to be focusing a lot on the same kind of markets, and not only the local market, Seattle, but also connecting beyond Taiwan into other parts of Asia from Seattle. But it is good to have competition on that route. But do we really need 4 airlines on this route? Of course we don't. And could that capacity be better used from a strategic Taiwan economic perspective in other markets? Yes, of course it can. So there is definitely some room for improvement in this area, I would say.
Well, let's move to a medium sort of perspective in terms of time. In 2027, there will be new regulations introduced regarding SAF, sustainable aviation fuels, and there will be a required mix of those fuels in aviation fuels. So is Taiwan getting ready to meet those new requirements? Tomasz, what do you think?
Well, as mentioned, in 2027, the CORSIA, which is current industry scheme for leading the industry to be carbon neutral in 2050, will be compulsory. Now, currently, the participation in CORSIA is voluntary. And indeed, the big part of these efforts is sustainable aviation fuel of SAFs, as they are named. We see a lot of movement towards implementing SAF in the region. I think Singapore is one of the leaders. Definitely, there is a big campaign in Japan. Together with Boeing, there is production of SAF. Also, Japan is moving towards other alternative fuel, namely hydrogen, and there is a production of SAF being started in China too. So, but at the same time, last year the document introduced by Taiwan government is sort of encouraging production of SAF. When we listen to IATA, which is industry voice, there is a clear message that the industry wants government to step in and actually get involved in producing sustainable aviation fuel. Otherwise, we will not be able to reach the targets. And the situation, because using of SAF will be obligatory, when the carriers will need to procure this fuel, and also even to produce in the future, it will be necessary to procure the feedstock, which may not be available. So I think definitely there is a moment to start growing this industry in Taiwan, and the risk is if we don't act right now, maybe this action will be more difficult in the future.
Well, we are on final approach for this episode, if you'll forgive the pun. But I do want to talk about one more thing before we end today, and that is Comac, or China's state-run aircraft manufacturing company. And it's recently launched narrow-body C919. So we've all heard, and our viewers as well, about the quality issues with Boeing and the rough patch that they hit. Does that mean that Comac has more of a potential to enter the market as a viable third player in the aviation manufacturing industry? And what kind of obstacles is it facing on its way to that goal? Brendan, what do you think?
Certainly, there's an opportunity over the long term, and the industry could benefit from a third choice, regardless of the issues that Boeing has faced recently, and also the supply chain and delivery delay issues that has set back several airlines in resuming restoring capacity. So so there's a clear opportunity, but it's a long-term one. It's the Boeing crisis is hopefully a short-term crisis, and the Comac opportunity is long-term, not short-term, because the 919 is not certified yet outside China, and until that happens, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to secure significant orders outside of China. I mean, it can potentially secure some orders from China-backed foreign airlines, and there's quite a few, particularly in Southeast Asia, that some of which have already ordered the 919 and or the ARJ21 or are operating the ARJ21, which is Comac's regional jet. But I wouldn't really, these airlines that are China-backed, they're small operators, and they're obviously not significant from a global perspective. So until Comac breaks through with a major airline that is not China-backed, and that's not going to happen until the airplane's certified, and also until they build up the support for the aircraft globally, because you have to be able to service the aircraft, not only just deliver it. And I think that will take some time as well. So it's definitely going to happen over time, but I don't see any kind of near-term breakthrough in terms of orders of significance outside of China for the 919. And by the time that happens, maybe the Boeing crisis will be resolved anyway.
All right. Well, thank you both, my panelists, for your expertise and your steady hand in flying this conversation to its destination. Brendan Sobie, an aviation analyst and consultant based in Singapore. Tomasz Śniedziewski, aviation journalist, speaking to us from Kaohsiung in Taiwan. And to our viewers at home, thank you for flying connected. If you've enjoyed today's episode or have anything you would like to add to the dialogue, join the conversation on our social media. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.